The first thing I want us to see is that your marriage is a legacy. These are the words, the final words of a marriage that has gone on for a long period of time. They're able to look back on their marriage and give some final pieces of advice to everybody. And the first one is your marriage is a legacy. In verse 8, it says, we have a little sister. She has no breast. This is a young girl, possibly a real sister, possibly just a younger generation that's looking at them and saying, we're watching you. We're watching you. We're learning. Y'all stop talking. We're learning about how to have a marriage from you. I'll never forget. Shelby, I don't know if you remember this, but Shelby came to me, and I don't even know if I don't think y'all were together yet, or maybe you had just gotten together. And Shelby came to me, and we were having a conversation about something, and she said, Neil, I just want to let you know, when you hug Jessica and give Jessica a kiss, or y'all stand in church holding hands, or your arm is around her, she said, I had never seen that in church before until coming here. And she said it has meant a lot for her to see an older generational couple expressing physical affection for one another in this service. I'm not hugging Jessica and giving her a kiss because I want other people to see it. I do it because I can't keep my hands off of her, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying, Andy? And but what was a reminder immediately was, I knew this, but here it is in my face. People are watching my marriage. They're looking, a younger generation is looking at the people in front of them and saying, what kind of marriage do they have? What can I learn from them? And one day you're going to be married, and there's going to be a generation behind you that is looking at your marriage to see what kind of marriage do they have? Can I learn from them? Can they be a testimony for me? And look at what verse 9 says. If she is a wall, we will build on her a battlefield of silver. If she is a door, we will enclose her with the boards of cedar. Here's what this means. This means she now, this younger generation, is looking at an older generation, and the impact of the older generation it's gonna reach down into the younger generation. And this is saying, we don't know when she reaches that age where she's attracted and dating, will her sexuality be a wall or will it be a door? A wall that is protected and guarded, or a door that swings open? We will learn a lot from the generations above us, and those generations are going to have an impact on the younger generations. The Bible talks about the older men teaching the younger men, and the older women teaching the younger women. And so she's saying here, there is a younger generation behind us that is learning about purity, that is learning about sexuality, that is learning about dating and courtship and marriage. And when you are at the end of your marriage, you want to be able to say, we left a testimony to a younger generation about what a good marriage should look like. I have taught this series 3 times. This is the first time that I've taught this series with my kids sitting here. The truth is, they're going to remember some of the things that we talked about. You're going to remember some of the things that we talked about. But you know that the truth is, the testimony of my marriage to my wife, more will be caught than taught. In other words, what I mean by this is that my kids and your kids one day are not going to remember probably specific lessons you taught them about marriage. Let me sit you down and teach you a lesson about marriage. What they will do, though, is they will catch by watching you what a marriage is supposed to look like. More is caught than taught. It doesn't mean we don't teach, but we learn by watching other people. how they live, what kind of marriage that they have. I know that it grosses out my kids when I'm lovey-dovey with my wife. But you know what? I want them to catch that a marriage, that's what it should look like. That a husband and wife should be affectionate to one another. And that's what will happen in your marriage too, is that your marriage can be a testimony to those that come behind you, and they can catch a lot about what it looks like. Second thing, God is going to use the virtue and the failings in your marriage. God is going to use the virtue and the failings in your marriage. You're going to be able to teach people and to be an example of people in the good and the bad. There is no marriage that is perfect. None. Every marriage has difficulties. Every marriage has struggles. Marriage, remember we talked about marriage takes hard work. And there are times where we fail. If we keep persevering through the failure, then we will even be able to use the failure as an example. Now here in this text, it's interesting. Look at what she says in verse 10. She says, we got a younger sister, and she's watching us. Is she going to be a wall or is she going to be a door? Now look at what she says in verse 10. She says, I was a wall. What does that mean? I was pure sexually. I kept myself for marriage. I was not a door. I was a wall. And then she says, then in his eyes, as one who finds peace. Now notice what she says, and my breasts were like towers. That just means I was mature. I was pure and I was mature and I waited and I did it God's way until I gave myself to my husband, and there I found peace. Now, this next verse is a difficult verse to interpret. Okay? And theologians and scholars have wrestled with it. I'm going to give you what I think this is about. Verse 11. So there's good. I saved myself for marriage. Our marriage was peace to me. There's also bad. Look at verse 10. Solomon had a vineyard. He let out the vineyard to keepers. Each one was to bring for its fruit 1,000 pieces of silver. Solomon was a rich man. And Solomon had a rich vineyard. I think what she's saying is, I was a wall and I was pure, but my husband wasn't. We know that Solomon ends up having 300 wives and 700 concubines. Now, most scholars believe this is the woman he loved. That the rest of these wives, he made contracts with other nations. So he took the king's daughter from another nation and married her. But this was like who his heart really was for. But she says, Solomon, I was a wall and our marriage was peace. And you had a giant vineyard. And you had all of these wives. And you did not keep yourself for me the way you should have. And then look at what she says in verse 10. My vineyard, my very own, is before me. You, O Solomon, may have the 1,000 and the keepers of the fruit 200. Here's what I think she's saying. You had this giant vineyard, Solomon. This giant vineyard that you had to let other people work. It was so huge. All I had was my vineyard. And guess who I kept it for? You. And nobody else. Now, I don't think she's shaming Solomon here. I think, as we know Solomon does from the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon gets to the later stage of his life and he looks back and he says, what in the world was I doing? He says in the book of Ecclesiastes, everything was vanity. All the riches that I had, everything that I had was vanity. And at the end of the day, the only thing that really mattered was obeying God and fearing him. Why didn't I get that? And I think they've come to the end of their marriage and they're looking back and she's saying, I was faithful. I took my vineyard and I kept it pure for you and you alone. You had this giant vineyard that you didn't keep. And I don't think she's shaming him. I think what's happening is they're able to look back and say, we did some things the right way and we did some things the wrong way, Solomon. Now, it doesn't mean, well, what that means is you're going to do some things the wrong way. You're going to try not to as a Christian. You're going to try hard to do it the right way, but you're going to do some things that are wrong. Hopefully you learn from them and you're able to use them to bless somebody else. That God will be able to use that to teach somebody else something. It may be your own children. It may be the generation behind you. It may be a friend who starts going through something. You can say, I can relate to that because here's where we failed. So she was pure. Their marriage was shalom. And Solomon had this giant vineyard of multiple wives, but she kept herself pure. Solomon, I don't think, is the star of this book. I think the star of this book is his wife, the Shulamite. She's the star of this thing. Lastly, I want you to see that your marriage should end with the passion it began with. Your marriage should end with the passion it began with. He says in verse 13, "O you who dwell in the gardens with companions listening for your voice," let me hear it. He still longs, here at the end, longs to be with her. He longs to be with her. And then she uses, at the very last verse, she uses some of the same language that is used at their wedding. "Make haste, my beloved, be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of spices." She's using that same language of a stag bounding on the mountains to come to her. What this is telling us is they still have passion and romance and love and affection for one another, even at the end. Listen, if I walked into a restaurant and I saw two 80-year-olds who have been married for 60 years kissing on each other in a booth, I would think that's the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. I would think that is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. Because here they are, having been married all these years, and there's still that unquenchable fire in them. Your marriage should end with the passion it began with. Remember I told you that people think that all the hot and heavy romance stuff comes, when you're young? No, it doesn't. It comes when you've matured. It comes when you've known each other the way that you really should. And a lot of the things that used to get in the way don't get in the way anymore. And you're able to appreciate one another and love one another and have passion for one another. And the depths of that is so much better later in life than it is the beginning. Now, here's how I want to end. Two main things I want to end with. If you are graced with a marriage, okay, and you follow God and you obey God and you find someone who loves the Lord and you love the Lord and you are in a Christian marriage, let me say something to you. Look at me right now. We're not done. Look at me and listen. Your need for Jesus will never be more real than in that marriage. Marriage is awesome. It's my favorite thing. It really is my favorite thing. I love being married to Jessica. I love her. But my need for Jesus is never more real to me than in this marriage. Jesus, I need you to help me love her right. I need you to help me not be selfish. I need you to help me to sacrifice Lord, I need my pride killed. Lord, I never knew how much I needed Jesus till I got married. So here's what that means. You better start, teenager, you better start cultivating your relationship with Jesus now, because you are going to need it to be strong when you get married. You cannot enter into a marriage and be an immature Christian. You are going to go through so much pain and so much hardship. But if you will work right now, work toward building your relationship with Jesus and having intimacy with Jesus and bearing out the fruit of the Spirit, so that is strong and there's strength there, so that when you get married, you are ready as you can be. Because marriage is going to let you know how much you need Jesus. And just talking the talk, oh, I love Jesus and I'm a Christian, and then you get married, but you haven't really been walking with Jesus, it's going to become evident immediately. Immediately. So start working now on your relationship with Jesus. So when the time comes to be married, you're strong for your spouse. You can love your spouse properly. So here at the end of Song of Solomon, we learn your marriage is going to be a legacy. You're going to have virtues and you're going to have failings. End it with passion. Be passionate all the way to the end. You better start right now, teenagers. Loving Jesus, following Jesus, pursuing Jesus, so that you can be strong and mature for your spouse one day.